Welcome to my podcast, Shaping Your Journey. My name is Aldo Matza, percussionist, drummer, and artistic director of Coast Music, inviting you to join in conversations, listening in conversations with friends, artists, and experts in the music world. Today, I have the great honor and the great pleasure of having my great friend, Bobby Sanabria from New York, with us, and we're going to talk about shaping your journey. Thank you, Bobby, for joining us.
Thank you, Aldo. It's a privilege, pleasure, and an honor. Thank you so much for inviting me. And hello, everyone out there.
Yay! And I wanted to ask you before we get into the journey itself, the shaping your journey. Tell us a little bit from the very beginning. What started it for you? What was that spark?
Well, I was very fortunate because I grew up in a place that's unfortunately been known as the symbol of urban decay in terms of the modern contemporary urban experience, and that's the South Bronx in New York City. And for those of you who don't know, I'm of Puerto Rican ancestry. I'm what they call a New Yorican, which means I was born and raised in New York City. My parents are from Puerto Rico. They migrated. They didn't immigrate because Puerto Rico is part of the United States. It's known technically as a commonwealth. So they didn't immigrate, they migrated. And they faced the same problems that everybody else faced, that were immigrants coming to New York City with the Italians, the Irish, etc., African Americans in the Great Migration from down south in the from the 30s, 40s, 50s. They suffered racial prejudice. They met in New York City at a house party. My father's from Jabucoa, Puerto Rico. I'm sorry, from Guanica, Puerto Rico. My mother's from Jabucoa. Jabucoa is on the eastern part of the island. Guanica is down in the south central coast of the island. And Guanica is very important because it used to have the biggest central, the biggest sugar refinery on the island. It was very important to U.S. business. And in 1898, the U.S. Army and the Marines came in through there and basically invaded the island and took the island over. The general was named General Miles, and they specifically assigned him to do that because he had been very instrumental in the Amerindian Wars in the West. And
Wow.
but that's a whole nother can of worms.
Interesting, yes.
And so my journey begins in the South Bronx. And I was very fortunate because even though the South Bronx became the symbol of urban decay, and it wasn't the people of the South Bronx fault, it was city planners, particularly Robert Moses, who built two massive highways that still live in infamy till this day, the Cross Bronx Expressway and the Bruckner Expressway. And they cut through pincers through the South Bronx, which was a vibrant working class community made up of Italians, Irish, some Germans, African Americans, and Puerto Ricans, and Jewish people. And that whole synergy that was happening, and the fact that the Bronx at that time, before those highways were built, had as many or more nightclubs, catering halls, dance halls than Manhattan, believe it or not.
Wow.
So all these groups were interacting with each other. That didn't mean that there wasn't any territorial imperatives happening. There was racism happening amongst each other. But the neutral zones, the demilitarized zones, if I could use that old term from the Vietnam era, was the candy store, the bodega, which is, for those of you who don't know, a bodega they were owned by basically Puerto Ricans, and they're small convenience stores that are like a tiny miniature supermarket. And they were very central to the vibrancy of any neighborhood in New York City. Then they started to become turned over to the Dominican community, and then the Korean community, et cetera. And now a lot of them have become high-end delis and things like that. But that's another story. But they were very part of the vibrancy of New York City culturally. So that was a neutral zone. And if you went to a jazz club in the South Bronx, there were many jazz clubs, believe it or not. Places like Kenny's, and the most famous was the 845, which is on was on Longwood Prospect and Westchester Avenues. And if you ever get to meet Herbie Hancock or have met him, I suggest all of you, like I did, I was invited by him to play at the first International Day of Jazz at the UN many years ago. And we were backstage just chit chatting. And I said to him, Mr. Hancock, do you remember the 845? And he looks at me in shock and he goes, how the hell do you know about the 845? And I go, because I'm from the Bronx. And he started smiling. He hugged me. And we had like a half-hour conversation about that. The 845 was the jazz club in the South Bronx. You took the 2 of the 5 train, get off at Prospect Avenue, walk down, and it was right there on the corner. It was black owned and well, it was Jewish owned and black run. And as far as I know from the historical record, and everybody played there. That's where Horace Silver played with the original Jazz Messengers when he formed it, and then gave it over to Art Blakey, Helen Merrill. Everybody played there. Chick Corea, when he came to New York City for the first time, he lived for a short time, I believe, in the Bronx, in the South Bronx. Herbie Hancock, when he came from Chicago, lived with Donald Byrd, who was living in the South Bronx and in the Morrisania section. And then he got his own apartment in the South Bronx. Thelonious Monk lived for 3 years in the South Bronx. Um, you know, so many people lived that were jazz musicians in the South Bronx. And of course, the Bronx became known as El Condado de la Salsa, the borough of salsa. So all these incredible, iconic figures that formed the basis for this incredible music. And people ask me, well, Bobby, what's salsa really? I go, it's Cuban music played with a freaking New Yorican attitude. That's what it is. And so you got people like Ray
Sauce.
Barretto, right? You got people like Ray Barretto, the great percussionist and the National Damaria's jazz master, Manny Oquendo, who was the timbale player uh, and bongo player for Eddie Palmieri's La Perfecta in the 60s. And he and Tommy Lopez developed their own version of Mozambique that Peyo El Afrocan created in Cuba, Pedro Izquierdo, who just celebrated her birthday last week on the 7th. But anyway, they developed their own version of it, which has become known as the New York style of Mozambique. And that's, what Steve Gadd played. And of course, most young drummers that are outside of our culture, they're not interested, for whatever reason, they're not interested in our culture or not exposed to it. But through Steve Gadd, they get possibly interested because they say, oh, that's a cool beat, I should learn that or whatever. So
which comes from the conga comparsa, right?
right,
The
the
Cuban,
conga,
yeah.
the carnival processions that happen in Cuba, in Havana in January, in the first week of January, going into the second week, and in
Santiago,
Santiago they happen July 24th or July 25th. I'm not sure, but Santiago is the capital of the eastern part, and
right.
their comparsa, their conga line, etc., conga procession, they were the originators of that. And then the Habaneros put their own spin on it. But most people know the Havana style.
Yeah.
But that's another question. You want to find out
Yes.
more? Go to Aldo's Cosa Camp.
Yes, yes, and I have a book on with that, and as you know, and just on that note, you know that the Cuban Ministry of Culture has accepted my book to be used as an official book in the conservatories in Cuba, which
That's
was
fantastic, man. That's
tremendous
not
honor for me.
Yeah, but now you got to write a cookbook. So
Italian, Cuban. Well, you know, there's a
it's
really
all,
great.
but just to finish off,
Yeah.
I was the beneficiary of growing up in that culture. And the reason the South Bronx uh, became the symbol of urban decay, when those 2 highways were built by Robert Moses, who was this grand architect of remodeling the city and this, that, and the other, he destroyed the infrastructure of the South Bronx because many people from that were African American during the Great Migration, very famous, started in the 30s, 40s, 50s, going many hundreds of thousands of African Americans came to New York City, and they found work in the South Bronx. There was a lot of factory work, Puerto Ricans migrating from Puerto Rico, etc. The Irish community, the German community. The South Bronx used to be known as the piano district. We had more piano factories in the South Bronx than any other place in the United States. And they were mostly run by German piano builders. And they supplied all the pianos for the tri-state area, for all the public schools, et cetera, colleges, and for a lot of the rest of the country. So it was a vibrant scene happening, and all these cultures were happening. And despite the racism and the territorial imperatives between the groups,
Right.
as I said before, the neutral zones where the barbershop, the bodega, the church dance, or the club dance or jazz club, et cetera, people would go and congregate there because of live music. All the ballrooms we had in the South Bronx, the Savoy Manor on East 149th Street off of the Grand Concourse, that was the sister ballroom to the Savoy in Manhattan, the famous Savoy Ballroom.
Right.
And then we had the Hunts Point Palace in the Hunts Point section of the South Bronx. That was the third largest ballroom in New York City. It held like 3,000, 4,000 people. And they had smaller ballrooms inside that place. And there you could see the Duke Ellington played there, Count Basie played there, and of course the big three, Machito and his Afro-Cubans, Tito Puente and his orchestra, and Tito Rodriguez, the greatest orchestras in our genre in terms of Afro-Cuban based dance music in a big band context. They modernized the music, particularly Machito. It's fused it with jazz harmony and arranging technique, and the rest is history. And I grew up in that environment, and that was all happening before the building of these two highways. When those two highways were built, the property values all went down in the South Bronx. All that factory work went away, and people were displaced because the city claimed eminent domain. And if that you had a small house, and there were many small affordable houses in the South Bronx at that time, because they were built by Jewish builders in the 20s going into the 30s. But what happened? The stock market crash happens in 1929. So they decided, you know what? We have to sell these houses, or at least lease them, rent them. Why don't we rent them or sell them to African Americans? We'll interview them, and there are many African Americans that are bus drivers, police officers, in the fire department. Some of them are school teachers. Some of them work for the sanitation department. So that's how a lot of African Americans were able to get homes in one particular area of the South Bronx, the Morrisania section of the South Bronx. So, and of course, then the Puerto Rican migration. So what happens when cultures collide, as the great Dr. Fernando Ortiz from Cuba used to say? What happens? A new culture is created. So that's what I represent. And Morris High School, which is where Colin Powell went to, and my father went to for 1 year when he came finally migrated from Puerto Rico to New York City. Morris High School in the 1950s was the most integrated high school in the United States. So the Bronx was a symbol of forward progress in that respect. And New York City had the best music education program in the country. When you got into the 5th grade, the homeroom teacher would say, who would like to learn how to play a musical instrument? You raise your hand. Okay, on this index card, write down your 3 choices. And the band director will tell you which one what instrument you're assigned to. Who doesn't want to learn a musical instrument? You raise your hand. Great. You people are in the chorus.
Nice.
So why do you think we had such great vocal doo-wop harmony groups coming out of New York City? Because kids learn how to sing harmony in class. And they're singing Bach chorales and all that, but then they would say, oh, well, let's sing R&B things, you know? So when Robert Moses built those 2 highways, and through the malfeasance of politicians, corrupt politicians, the city started going bankrupt. the neighborhoods were destroyed. And then what they started to do was they did a thing. Well, they said, well, we got to get rid of all these people that are living in the South Bronx so that builders could come in and build high rises, et cetera, et cetera. They were like chomping at the bit. So how do we get rid of them? They said they came up with an idea called planned shrinkage. We'll force them out by shutting down firehouses, shutting down police precincts, shutting down ambulance services, shutting down hospitals. Can you imagine that?
Wow. Yeah. Of
And
course.
the
That'll do
idea
it.
was people would say, I can't live here anymore. F that. I'm going to leave. But they can't because they're working class. They don't got money to leave. So the unscrupulous landlords also started burning the tenements to collect the insurance money, which they got from Lloyd's of London. So they'd hire a junkie and pay him $20, $25, which was a lot of money back then. And they'd pour gasoline on the roof, light it. The top floor leaves. Then next week they do the second floor, the next floor, and the next floor. By the end of the week, the house would the whole building would be burned, and all the tenants were had to go somewhere. Some of them went to a single room occupancy hotels, et cetera, et cetera. It was chaos, total chaos in the city. I remember I was at a friend's apartment in a tenement, and all of a sudden a piece of paper came underneath the door, a piece of loose leaf. And so he looks at it and it said, "Get out of the building by 3:00.
Wow.
They're warning you that they're going to burn the building." Now, I grew up in the Melrose Projects on East 153rd Street and Cortlandt Avenue. And Cortlandt Avenue used to be called Dutch Broadway because in the late 19th century, early 20th century, that avenue was all Germans because of the German-based owned piano factories, and there were a lot of German breweries as well in the South Bronx. And as things changed, everything, and there was a big fire, a ferry, not a ferry, a ship. It was like a site. It was like a day trip ship called the Slocum. People used to get on it, have picnics on it, and they'd land on a small island in the Bronx, near the off of the Bronx, off the Bronx River, et cetera. And that ship caught on fire, and it was a big catastrophe. Hundreds of German people died. And that was the beginning of the end of the German community in the South Bronx and in Manhattan, in what became known as the Stuyvesant area. But anyway, me and my sister Joanne, we grew up with my parents, Jose and Juanita, may they rest in peace, in the Melrose housing projects. And my building was 681, right on the corner of East 153rd Street and Cortlandt Avenue. And I was the beneficiary of that. Why? Because the Melrose projects was mostly populated by African Americans. So I'm listening to the way they speak. I'm listening to the music that they're listening to, which is R&B, Motown, et cetera, et cetera. Not that you couldn't hear that on the radio, but when you're with the people that created that music, it's a different thing. You know, it's like you're one step removed from it. So when people ask me what's a New Yorican, I say, well, it's a person of Puerto Rican descent that grows up, born and raised in New York City or raised in New York City, because some New Yorkers are people that came to the city when they were 2 or 3 years old, and then they've grown up. And they grow up with African American music, and that means jazz, funk, rock, soul, everything. And they have a Jewish sense of humor. And also they grow up listening to their native Puerto Rican music, which is the Jíbaro music tradition from the mountains, the aguinaldos, the seis chorreados, things like that, and bomba en plena. And of course, we grew up with Afro-Cuban music, because Afro-Cuban music is what dominated and still dominates New York City. It's the pulse of New York City. You are what you eat. So people ask me all the time, why are you Puerto Ricans? You're so good at playing Cuban music. I said, well, it's our sister island, and that's what we heard growing up. And when people came from the island to New York City, they saw the most incredible orchestra that has ever existed, the Machito Afro-Cubans, the ones that developed Afro-Cuban jazz. Afro-Cuban jazz was not developed in Cuba first. It was developed in New York City in 1939 at a small Jewish catering hall on East 110th Street and Fifth Avenue, called the Park Palace Ballroom. And there, the Machito Afro-Cubans under Mario Balza's musical direction from Cuba fused jazz
Yeah,
arranging technique.
I want to get to that. Mauro Balza is a huge name, but I want to get to that. But first, tell us a little bit, well, like what inspired you to play music and play drums and percussion specifically. What started that trajectory?
Oh, because as I said before, I was lucky to grow up in that neighborhood, and the projects were predominantly African American. But the Puerto Ricans that lived there, you would hear in the summertime at night. Ay, 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 llegó Superman, oye, llegó Superman, bailando guaguancó. Oh, that's what you heard every night in the projects, man, in the summertime. In fact, if you didn't hear that, people would call the police precinct and say, yo, those Congo drums, something's wrong. They're not playing, you know. So it was very vibrant. It was like New Orleans. The closest thing I can to it is New Orleans. There's music. Right. There was music everywhere. It was coming out of the bodegas. Salsa was the gospel of New York City at the time I was growing up. Everybody knew had to learn three things: how to mambo, cha-cha-cha, and basic Lindy Hop step. You know, if you didn't, you probably never go on a date, get married, because there were people, the church dances, the weekend dances at the churches or at the local public school. They ruled in the working class neighborhoods. And then, of course, the places like the Hunts Point Palace that I mentioned, and there were many others, the Savoy Manor, as I mentioned. There was the Concourse Plaza Hotel, all these incredible jazz clubs in the South Bronx. It was incredible. As a musician, you could literally make a living and not leave the Bronx during the 40s and 50s, going into the 60s. And then, unfortunately, because of the Cross Bronx Expressway and the Bruckner Expressway being built, and the whole caving in of the property values, because let's say, Aldo, you own a tenement in the South Bronx, and these tenements were built in the 1890s, some of them in the 1880s. So you have to maintain that building. Right. So you have to get a boiler every couple of years, do what they call pointing, put on a new roof every once in a while, things like that. You go to the bank. Hi, I'd like to get a loan. I want to do some pointing on the building, and I need to replace. So I need to do some brickwork, etc. And I need a new boiler. I'd like to take out a loan. I own the building, and all of a sudden, the banker tells you, you know, Mr. Sanabria, I'm sorry, but we're not giving out any loans in where you live. And you go, but why? Well, that area has been redlined.
Sure.
So some of the unscrupulous building owners, you know what? F this. I'm going to burn the building and collect the insurance money.
Right. Yeah.
And that's what happened. And that's how the fires started in the South Bronx. And it was all because of that guy, Robert Moses. And it affected the Puerto Rican community, the Black community, but it also affected the Jewish community, incredibly so, and the Italian community.
Yeah, the Italians also, yeah.
Yeah, because I remember, check this out, man. Listen, I'm growing up in this project building that's predominantly African American. So, it's like every day, I go out, hey man, let me get a pound, whatever, like the vernacular of the streets, etc. I'm speaking Spanish at home, and then I go with my mother to Melrose Avenue, to where? To the Italian fruit and vegetable vendor. Yes. And she's talking to the gentleman in Italian. I'm not in Italian, in Spanish, and he's responding in Italian, which are very similar. So you have this synergy happening. I remember my father used to get his hair cut on Cortland Avenue. There was an Italian barber. We used to go there.
Yeah. It's funny about you mentioned Melrose Avenue. I never told you this, but my grandfather on my father's side used to live in New York before he went
Wow.
back to Italy, and he spoke
Wow.
English.
Right.
And part of the family actually lived on Melrose.
Wow. Do you know exactly what street on Melrose?
I don't, and we tried to do some research. I think we have something now that I can that I feel comfortable about. I saw some photos. My sister did some extra research, but it's I have a lot of family in New York who came later in
Right. Okay.
Brooklyn and Long Island and stuff. But my grandfather used to work for the railroad, and he went out to Long Island. But I remember on Melrose, and
That's
yeah, there's a
great.
whole
Yeah.
tradition. Yeah,
And so then the butcher on Melrose Avenue was German. So I remember
nice.
going in there. But the woman behind the counter didn't barely spoke English. My mother didn't really speak English at all. I was the one that basically taught my mother English, and I learned Spanish from her because, as many of you know, that's why they call it mother tongue. Like because you learn from your mother because she's the one taking care of you because most
Right.
women at that time stayed at home with their children. So she's making signs and this, that, and that. Somehow they would communicate, but the butcher was German. I remember that. And then the there was a barber shop on Cortland Avenue right next. There was a bodega, and that bodega is still there on the corner of East 153rd Street, right across from the project I grew up in, the project building 681. And right next to it was a black barber. And one time when I was like 5 or 6 years old in the summertime, they had the door open because nobody had air conditioning in those days. There were two barbers. One of them is sitting down reading the newspaper. The other one is doing what they call conking, which there was or processing of the person's hair. It was a product called concholine. It was made out of lye, and black people used to use it to straighten out their hair. But you had to go apply it because it burned. So it was somebody had to do it for you. So who's going to do it? A black barber. But it was a white guy sitting in the chair. He must have been Jewish or Italian, and he had what we call kinky hair, curly hair. And I'm there with my mouth open, and the guy looks at me, and the barber, he goes, "What's the matter, young man? You never seen a white boy get his hair conked before?" So these are the kind of indelible memories that I can only have. I could only have experienced growing up in the South Bronx. So you got rumba going on, Cuban rumba played by Puerto Ricans in the park, and some Jews and Italians, because as you know, as we say in Spanish, el tambor llama, the drum calls. So you have the original drum circle, people just watching, having beers, having a good time, clapping clave, etc. The element that was missing in the rumba tradition, as it was manifested in New York City, is that there wasn't, like in Cuba, the dancing
The
with the
dance
man and
part,
the
right?
woman. It was just the drumming. But I came from that generation. The drummers that came from that generation, some of them older than me, like Nicky Marrero, Mike Collazo, Manny, then older than those guys, Manny Oquendo, Tommy Lopez, Ray Barretto, all these incredible drummers. We all learned that way in the streets of New York. And then from my generation, people like Ralph Irizarry, Carlito Soto, Jimmy
Right.
Delgado, I'm from that generation. We learned in the streets. Watch, listen, and you learn. And the first time I ever played a percussion instrument was when I was about 12 years old. They were playing some rumba. And we played the way rumba was played in New York City. There wasn't such a thing as people playing the sticks, what we call the guagua, right?
The kata, the
Or the
kata, right?
palitos or the kata. There wasn't somebody doing that. It was either somebody playing a cowbell, playing that pattern on the cowbell one-handed. Okay. The concept of somebody playing on a piece of wood, the two sticks that are so commonly used in the rumba tradition,
Mhm.
Guaguancó, Colombia, and Yambu, nobody was doing that here in New York. So there was a guy who was about my age, and he had the cowbell. And when he played it, he couldn't keep up. And then, so I'm there watching, and I said, man, I could do this. I could play. I mean, in my head, I'm going, I could do this. I could do this. I could do this. But I was like scared to say, I could do this. Let me do it. So finally, I summoned up the courage. And one of the guys playing congas was a guy that lived in my building. His name was Chiqui. He was a good friend of my cousin, John Collado. The whitest Puerto Rican you could find. Red hair, green eyes, whiter than me. But the guy had the baddest freaking golpe seco on the quinto. He was a badass drummer. He was an electrician. That was what he did during the day, and he played congas at night just for fun. Like a lot of guys in Cuba too, they're not professional musicians, but they're just great rumberos. So I said, I could do this. Let me do it. Let me do it. And so he goes, he can't, And there was another gentleman who was, I believe he was a plumber. He was Afro-Puerto Rican, that he lived in my building too. And he was one of the other guys playing congas. And he knew me, like Chicky knew me, because I was a kid. Everybody knows each other in the neighborhood. Let him play. Let him try. So I picked up the bell and they stopped playing. The way we played rumba in those days was the way it used to be played as well in Cuba, with the clave. Instead of the melody the way it's played down. In New York and in Cuba back then, they played, which today is considered cruzado. Right. But that's the way everybody played back then. So anyway, they start playing, and I start playing the bell, the right pattern, but the bell sounds like crap. Instead of it sounds like clang, 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 and I'm going, what the hell? I'm playing. And Chicky goes, stop. See, I told you he can't play. And then that guy, I'll never forget him. I wish I could remember his name. He always said hi to my mother and everything. He said, no, he's playing the right thing. Listen, he goes to me, listen, there's a crack in the bell on the side.
I was just going to say, yeah.
And that's why it sounds like crap. Take the bell and hold it near the mouth and squeeze, and now play. So then they started again. And I played that damn thing for like 8 minutes. It must have been, nice. Everybody applauded and everything. And, Chicky was like winking at me, and this, that, and the other. But he was that's a New York thing, giving somebody a hard time, to see, challenging you. That was my first percussion lesson from that guy.
Nice.
When he said there's a crack in the bell, I'm looking at what do you mean there's a crack? You see this line where the weld is? It's not the welding is not, so squeeze and all those vibrations will go out and everything. So I learned something and I proved myself. And then from then on, they let me play, and I just imitated by watching, listening, and learning. So that was the first thing I ever played was a bell and congas. But you have to understand what we call Cuban music, the way we played in New York, salsa at that time, was the gospel of the streets. Everybody was into it. Whites, blacks, everybody. And of course, we were the avatars of it, Puerto Ricans, because every time I go to Cuba, I've only been to Cuba twice, but every time I've gone, they always would say to me when they found out I was Puerto Rican, oh, puertorriqueño, muchacho, mi hermano, gracias por preservarnos nuestra cultura. Thanks for preserving our culture, because if it wasn't for the Puerto Rican community of the island and of course New York City, the Cuban music wouldn't have existed in the United States after the revolution. We were the ones that kept it alive because we fell in love with it. It's our sister island too.
Yeah. When you say sister island, I mean, it's that close. I mean, physically it's very close. It's another island right near Cuba. Some people may not realize that, how close it is.
It really is part of our culture. It's part of our experience. Now, that culture of playing drums in the streets in New York is gone. Why? Because when Mayor Rudolph Giuliani, the infamous one, came in, At that time, New York City was going through another period of bankruptcy, etc. And there were a lot of homeless people, and they would make money by when you stopped at a stoplight, they'd come and squeegee your car. They'd spray some Windex on the windshield with a squeegee, wipe it off, and hopefully you'd give them they get a quarter from you or 50 cents or whatever. So the gentrifiers in neighborhoods and things, they started complaining, bitching. They started complaining about the drumming, just like the people that have been coming gentrifying New Orleans complained about the street parades, this, that, and the other. So Giuliani passed an ordinance saying you cannot play congas anymore on street corners, in the parks, et cetera, et cetera.
I didn't know he actually signed an ordinance.
You know what it was based on?
Wow.
It was based, you know what it was based on?
No.
The old slave laws.
Wow.
From the 18th and 19th century. Yeah. He used that as a model.
Because I thought that he had cleaned up that whole 34th Street, and Broadway all around there.
Times Square, yeah, all that.
Yeah, all the whole Times Square and around the bus station,
right.
All around it. But I didn't know he went that far to completely cut that out. That's crazy.
Yeah, and of course,
wow.
Of course, if for us, we are all children of Africa. That's you could be the whitest person on earth. We're all children of Africa, because civilization, the birthplace of civilization, is Africa. And some of us are closer to Africa than others. And we Puerto Ricans, Cubans, Dominicans, Brazilians, etc., we're very close to Africa. Southern Italians, Sicilian.
Calabrese.
Yeah, there you go.
Yep.
We're all African. Yep. We have some representation of Africa, whether it's with the tarantella, with the tambourines and things like that, or whether it's the panderetas, the jingless tambourines in Puerto Rico, or the congas in Cuba, et cetera, et cetera. We're all children of that. With all the rock beats that we do, they're all based on bell patterns, et cetera, from Africa. I crack up because when I do clinics, as you know, I tell people, the things that heavy metal drummers do come directly from Africa. And I demonstrated on the drum kit. First, I played on the rhythm on a bell, and I showed you, look, that's the same thing that John Bond's playing on the kick drum, except he's playing 2 and 4, things like people start going, what the hell? It's just that these things it's the whole divide and conquer thing, like from colonialism, and unfortunately from the Catholic Church too, that they used to control people, to separate us so that we wouldn't have any strength, we wouldn't have any unity. And our mission as musicians is to eradicate that and bring people together. And that's how we survived in the South Bronx, through the music, through that dark period when the city went bankrupt, when the Bronx literally was burning, the tenements were burning. Me and my sister Joanne were lucky because we lived in the projects. You cannot burn down a project, a high rise. Although, an interesting story. One time, me and my sister are I'm watching TV. She's in another room doing something. And all of a sudden she starts screaming, Bobby. And I go, what? What's going on? Look. And there's smoke coming underneath the door. We lived on the 12th floor,
wow.
Apartment 12A. And I go, get a towel, quick, get a towel, roll it and douse it in water. So I take the towel, put it to obstruct the smoke coming in. We go to the back, the farthest room away from the door, our parents' bedroom. And I said, open the windows, quick. She's crying. I'm going, holy sheesh, man. What are we going to do? We're on the 12th floor. There's no fire escapes, nothing. In the projects, there's a sticker on every door. It says, in case of fire, do not open this door. It may save your life, which I always remembered. I looked through the peephole and there was just smoke, just smoke. You couldn't see. So my sister's crying. I'm there. Finally, about half hour later, you hear banging under the boom, boom, New York City Fire Department. Anybody in there? I go, yeah. I go, stay inside. We'll let you know when you can come out. Somebody lit a mattress in the hallway of the stairwell.
Wow.
To smoke out the building. So there you go, man. Those are the kind of experiences that I had growing up. But all the positive things were this incredible music, the culture happening all at the same time. My cousin John Collado, who was older than me, one of his best friends was a drummer, Howard King, who was the drummer for Gary Bartz in the N2 troupe, famous alto and soprano saxophonist.
Right.
And Howard also played for McCoy Tyner. He was only 17 years old, 16, 17. He went to Music and Art High School, which now is the LaGuardia High School for the Performing Arts. So one day, John goes, "You want to meet Howard?" So sure. So we walked down the street, and he's got an MG car. He was like already living large, as we would say. I go, "Wow, what is?" And he goes, "You want to see my drums?" And he opens up the trunk. It's a little 18-inch bass drum. I had never seen a bass drum that small. I go, "Wow, why is this so small?" And he goes, uh, "Well, it's so it can fit in the car."
Yes.
And then also in the projects, in the project that, what was it, 305? I lived in 681. Francisco Bastar lived. Now, Francisco Bastar was Caco, the famous timbala player of the Alegre All Stars, which was the all-star band made up of the band leaders of the Alegre record company that was based in the South Bronx. And they did a series of albums that everybody should have: Alegre All Stars Volume 1, Volume 2, Volume 3, Volume 4, Volume 5. They they were all Cuban descarga albums made up of the finest Latin musicians in New York. And Al Santiago was the producer. He was an ex saxophone player, tenor player. That was a band leader, but he ran a record shop in the South Bronx. And he was inspired by the Cuban descarga albums from Panart. So he said, "Hey, man, we could do the same thing here. We got great Latin musicians here. Let's do it." So those are learning tools for every musician that's into this, wants to learn about this culture, about the music. You got to get those albums. And, most of it you can hear on YouTube. So Alegre All Stars.
Yeah.
But
Did
with
you
one L.
when did you start playing professionally, Bobby?
About 14.
About
About
14?
14. I started playing timbales because I just kept teaching myself by watching. But the thing was, at the same time that I'm in love with Cuban music, I'm falling in love with jazz. And why would that be?
Did somebody like turn you onto it, or you just
No,
all of a
no, because,
sudden?
well, my first, I have three great teachers in my life that changed my life musically. First one was my father, Jose Sanabria. May he rest in peace. He exposed me to the multiverse. That's why my big band is called the Multiverse Big Band,
Okay.
because he had an eclectic taste in music. He listened to Count Basie, Duke Ellington, but he also listened to Machito, Tito Puente, Tito Rodriguez, Noro Morales, et cetera, et cetera. He listened to the Jibaro folk music of Puerto Rico. He listened to Mexican rancheras. I don't know if you know this, but Puerto Ricans from that era, the 40s, 50s, and 60s, were super into Mexican music. Why? Because when they would go to Spanish language theaters in New York City, the movies they saw were what? Made
In
in
Mexico.
Mexico. So they
Yes.
heard that music and they bought the recordings. And in all those movies, they used to feature Cuban bands. You see Celia Cruz, you see Sonora Matancera. Of course, you see Perez Prado in a lot of those movies, et cetera, et cetera. There would always be a segment, like they're in a hotel or a nightclub, et cetera. So he's listening to all that. I'm listening to Harry Belafonte through him. Uh, my father had a ritual because my father was a machinist and he worked in Long Island in Valley Stream. It took him 2 hours to get to work and 2 hours to get back.
Wow.
Can you imagine that?
Yes.
So his ritual was he bought himself a lazy boy chair. He'd sit in the living room, lean back, as Fat Joe would say, the rapper, drink a Schaefer beer, the worst beer in the world, but he drank it because it was the sponsor of the New York Yankees. And he'd smoke a cigarette and listen to music. And my mother would say things like, "If you want to sit where your father is and do your homework there, So I'd be sitting or lying on the floor doing my homework, and I'd listen to what he listened to. So he listened to all this great music. And of course, then when he wasn't around, I would take the records and put them on, etc. And I would listen for the drum patterns, etc., etc. And the first the first four recordings I can tell you that I remember listening to as a child were "I'm In with the In Crowd" by Dobie Gray.
Oh,
I'm in with the in crowd. The second one was Recuerdos de Navidad by Trio Vega Bajeño from Puerto Rico. We have a tradition of guitar trios, and those in the trio, the players play the guitar and also sing in three-part harmony. So Trio Vega Bajeño was one of the most famous trios. And I remember in the 78, my father, he had a great record collection, just incredible. Anyway, that tune, Recuerdos de Navidad, is in a Cuban guaracha style, but done with a Puerto Rican vibe. And in the way we play guarachas, the bongo is very prominent. So, you're hearing mira que vuelve, tradición del año, uno pan alegre, otro pan llorando. But the bongos, the martillo is going on like ridiculous, man. To this day, I don't know who was on the recording playing bongo, but it was just killing. I was fascinated by that, and I played that record over and over again. And so then the third record I remember was "Reach Out" by the Four Tops from the Motown label. Come on and reach out, baby. And I'm listening to the drum patterns. So, and the fourth record that I remember listening to as a child was Sergio Mendes and Brazil 66, Más Que Nada. Whoa, whoa, why? And I remember I used to drive my mother crazy because I put that record on over and over again. My father bought the 45. And my mother thought that I was autistic or something because I just, I play those records over and over again.
right.
Because I was fascinated by the Sergio Mendes record. I was fascinated by they were singing in Portuguese, but I didn't know it at the time. And the rhythm, and it was just, and it is a break. If you go right now, any of you, to YouTube and look up Más Que Nada Sergio Mendes, there's a little one bar break that Sergio Mendes does. It's a blues break that he does on the piano. And later on, when I learned more about the history of him and jazz and everything, I found out that he copped that from Horace Silver because he was into Horace Silver. So anyway, I used to love to hear that break when he did that one bar break over and over again. And my mother tells my father something, and everything in Spanish sounds more dramatic, just like everything in Italian or French sounds more dramatic. Algo no está bien con tu hijo. No, something's wrong. Something's not right with your son.
Your son. Classic.
So he comes over and he looks at me listening to, and I would listen. I would put the stereo low because I didn't want to bother anybody. And of course, my mother would tell me to put it low, and I would just put my ear to the speakers, and I'm listening to all the instruments and trying to decipher everything, the drum patterns. And that recording is good because you hear the bossa nova samba rhythm really clear on the drums, especially the bass drum.
Right.
It's one of the first recordings where you really hear the bass drum really
clearly. No, I remember that. It was really well done. Yeah.
Yes. So my father's looking at me and he's kind of smiling. And I noticed that he was looking at me, and I turned the record down, and he goes, "No, you could keep listening if you want to." He goes, "No, Pa, I had a question for you. How come it sounds like Spanish, but it's not really, it's some kind of other type of Spanish or the accent or whatever?" He goes, "Get the globe." So he brings the globe over, and he goes, "Listen, the reason you like the music so much is because the rhythms that are on the record and all the music that we listen to here at home and you're listening to on the radio, they all come from Africa. I go, wow, that's cool. So then he goes into, and they are singing in Portuguese. This is Portugal, and it's a different language, and that's what they speak in Brazil, because there was a thing called the transatlantic slave trade, and he's talking about slavery to me. And I go, wow, I'm 12 years old, whatever I was at the time. 66. I was born in 57. So yeah, so there you go. I mean, I'm like 9, 10 years old. So then he goes, the reason we speak Spanish is because this country, Spain, and they were part of the transatlantic slave trade too. And he's telling me all this, but they weren't the only ones. The Dutch were, the French were, and this, that. He's telling me about Haiti, and everything. This, and I'm going, wow, this is deep. So I always remember this. He goes, so that means that even though you don't look black, the culture that you represent has Africa in it. So make sure that if you ever hear anybody disparaging black people, you stand up and defend them, because they're insulting not only them, they're insulting you too. And my father's mother, my grandmother, Tomasa, was black. So I knew that, already, but he just reinforced it in me. So that was a deep, deep lesson. My father was my greatest teacher. He taught me in that one little talk that he gave me to be proud that we were multicultural. He talked about the Amerindian culture too and everything. And he goes, where I come from, Guanica, Puerto Rico, that's an Amerindian name from the Taino people. And your mother, she's from Jabucoa. That's another Amerindian name. It is in Spanish. So he's telling me all this stuff, man. And I'm going, wow, so in that one little lesson, he's given me the cultural grounding that I've had throughout my life, and I've expressed that in as a musician, and I mean, I loved my father very much for that. It was, he had a rough life. I mean, he should have been a history teacher. That's my love of history also comes from him. He should have been a history teacher, but in those days, they used to tell the Puerto Ricans and blacks, the guidance counselors, you don't want to go to college. Get yourself a trade, learn a trade. So he went to Alfred E. Smith High School, which was also known as the Bronx Vocational High School, and he learned the trade of machinist.
Right.
So, but he loved music dearly. And one of probably the saddest day of my life is they had a fire in their apartment several years ago, and my father's entire record collection became one gigantic ball of wax.
Wow.
And I remember, first of all, I was worried that something had happened. The firemen came in time. It was an electrical fire. And we're looking at the mound of wax. It's like a mountain made of wax. And the album covers are all strewn off. Some of them are burnt. And he's a tear's coming down his eyes. He's looking at it, just staring at it. And he goes, this was all going to be yours one day. And I said, Pop, don't worry about it, man. You can replace it with CDs. He goes, it's not the same.
It's not the same.
And he's right, because I used to stare at the album covers.
Sure. Oh,
I mean, and this was my upbringing. That's how I got into jazz, through that. But I also got into jazz, oddly enough, through the cartoons at the time. The Hanna-Barbera cartoons.
Yes.
Johnny Quest, the Jetsons,
Flintstones,
Top Cat, right? They all had jazz in them. Yeah. Top Cat, Zuba-Duba, the indisputable leader of the band. He's the top, he's the tip, he's above everything. He's the most top, Zuba-Doo, Top Cat. Swinging like the Count Basie Orchestra. I mean, I didn't know that was called swing or anything like that. All I know is I liked it. I learned the song and I'm tapping my fingers, snapping it. We used to do, it was a ritual for us to see the Ed Sullivan Show. So who did I see? I saw Count Basie. I saw Buddy Rich. I saw Duke Ellington. I saw Candido. Little did I know that I would wind up playing with Candido, and he would be a close friend and mentor to me. It was amazing. I
No, and
mean,
you worked very closely with Candido. We had him at COSA. I mean, you've been at
right,
COSA many times at the COSA camps.
right.
One year we had the pleasure of having him there for that. He was amazing.
You want to hear Candido at his get an album, his first album as a leader. It's from 1955. It's simply just called Candido. Or 1956, it's on the ABC Paramount label. He's on the cover with one white conga, you know, and
I
he gives a
remember.
clinic. He gives a clinic on that album how to play conga in a jazz swing context, and you can hear the tunes on YouTube. But get that album. I suggest everybody get that. Just amazing. And there's a couple one or two tunes that he's playing bongos between his legs and one conga, and he's doing that coordinated independence that he developed, keeping a tumbao pattern with one hand and improvising with the other. Just amazing. Another album you can get is Tony Bennett live at Carnegie Hall. Just amazing, amazing on one conga.
One
And then
conga.
forget it, his innovations with 2 and 3 congas and multiple percussion. So I have all his drums. I have all his drums. I have the first version of the foot pedal that he developed in 1952 to play the cowbell with his foot. The
Wow.
Gahate bracket is nothing new. He invented that. I have it. I have it, you know. And if you want to read about him, simply type in your search window WBGO Candido, Bobby Sanabria, and the most extensive article ever written on his life pops up. And you everything you always want to know about Candido, but we're afraid to ask. And the fact that he lived to be 99,
I was just gonna say he was 99. Yeah,
and
and
he's
lived.
asking me every week, when's the next gig? When's the next gig? So I treasure that very
Yeah.
greatly. I've been very fortunate because I've played with every incredible conga player of the modern era, except Chano Pozo. He was killed in 1948. You talk about Ray Barreto, Candido, Francisco Aguabella, Julito Collazo, Mongo Santa Maria, who I worked with and recorded
Dizzy.
with. Papo players like Papo Pepin, Ray Mantilla. I mean, you name it, I've gotten to play with them. So, and they all have different styles all together, which is a great thing. And
So
it's a nice feather in my cap to
let
have.
me take you back just a little bit, Bobby. I mean, just to finish with those white congas. I remember when we had Candido, like we had to have the white congas. So I got LP to send us a set of his drums, and
Right,
I mean, talk about a melodic player,
right,
unbelievable. Just total melody. Whether it was one or two drums, it didn't matter. It was like
right.
melody. It's amazing. Huh? But
And according to Ray Romero, who's another great conguero and all around percussionist, he told me that when Candido came from Cuba in 1940, he came 6 months before Chano Pozo. He
okay,
was here in New York before Chano Pozo. So he said that he had as much speed as Giovanni did
wow,
or Richie Flores. And that at that time, nobody had ever seen anybody play with those kind of chops
wow,
before. So it's just amazing. And but you
interesting.
get a taste of that on those recordings that I mentioned. So you were gonna. I'm sorry, I
Yeah,
interrupted you.
I was going to
Gonna
say
finish.
just to back up a little bit because you've played with so many people, and I wanted to talk about that a little bit. But in your own training, your own trip, and your own trajectory, you went to Berklee. But
Right.
before that, what prepared you to go to Berklee, or what was it that guided you that way? Because in
The
Berklee,
second, yeah,
in
the
no, I was
second
going to say
mentor, yeah, yeah,
and in Berklee, because this is important because you got a degree both in classical percussion as well
right,
as in jazz, which it
right,
was interesting because I had I have both as well. So
right.
it's interesting to have a wider angle in your music where you come from. But what took you there?
Well, just to reiterate that, look at the gray hairs we both have, man. That's because of,
No, no,
but
I
but
paint mine white.
but anyway, well, to continue on my journey, the you know, like because I played jazz drum set, as you know, obviously, and as well. But uh, all of the things I was learning served me well. But I was fascinated by the drummers that I would see on these TV shows like Sonny Payne, Louis Bellson, Ginger Baker,
Wow.
of course the incredible Buddy Rich. Uh, it was just amazing seeing these Gene Krupa, who was a person that is kind of forgotten now, but all of you who see the standard four-piece drum set with two cymbals and a hi-hat, Gene Krupa was the one that codified that. It's because of him that we have that basic codification of what a basic drum set is. So, and he's a bad cat. He was a bad cat, both rhythmically, melodically. People should check him out. There's tons of videos. Check him out. Um, I saw these people on TV and I said, wow, man, I want to play drums. And so, I got some sticks. I started imitating whatever I saw. And it was funny because I used to use a pillow. Little did I know that that doing all that pillow work was fortuitous, because Dennis Chambers talks about that, just using a pillow to develop your strength. There's no bounce and everything. I used to practice the jazz right on the pillow. I go, oh, shit, man, this is hard to do. But I'm an ignorant kid. I'm going, there's no bounce, So finally I kept bugging my father for a drum set. And we went to Manny's Music, and I was like 13, 14. And there was the guy behind the counter was a guy named Buzzy. I always remember him. He was a local jazz drummer. And he showed my father the Ludwig catalog and this, that, and the other. And at that time, a top quality drum set was like $300-400. Today's thousands. It was a lot of money back then for a working class person. And my father's like going, oh man, and I'm going, oh man, I'm not going to get it. Buzzy goes, Mr. Sanabria, this is what we could do. The cheapest drum set that Ludwig made at that time was called Ludwig Standard. It was like a cheap one ply thing with fiberboard or whatever. Anyway, he goes, you can get a tom-tom, a bass drum, and a snare drum, and a hi-hat, and it'll cost you like $200 or something like that. And then you can get one. I'll throw in a cymbal stand, and I'll throw in some cheap hi-hats and one cheap cymbal, whatever. He was a nice guy. Because he saw that was good. I was heartbroken, and he saw that my father really wanted to get it for me, and that's how I started. So what did I do when I got home? The first thing that I played is what everybody plays or tries to play when they get on a drum set. I don't know if you could hear that, but
I didn't.
Which is a basic rock funk hip hop groove, So of course I'm driving my mother crazy or whatever. But anyway, let me tell you another interesting story about growing up in the projects. That guy Howard King, one time in the summer, it's 3:00 in the morning. He starts playing like that. And he's playing like for 20 minutes straight, loud like a mother flower, man. And nobody calls the cops. Nobody yells, hey, man, I'm trying to get some sleep. He just did it. He stops, and all of a sudden you hear somebody yell out, yo, man, why'd you freaking stop? That was funky, And then somebody yells out, Howard, that's growing up in the hood, man. That's only in New York, only in the South freaking Bronx, something like that happened.
That reminds me, Bobby, when the first time I went to Cuba, because once I went the first time, I said, I got to learn this stuff. So I went to study with some people, and I was hanging with some musicians, and it was really late. We had, I had some rum coming from a Roomba party, and we're walking down the street in Old Havana, and we didn't know what time it was. It was probably about 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning. We're walking down the street, total dark, and we're playing. The guys are singing. Everybody's having a good time. As we're walking along, people will come on their balconies and just go
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
as we're going along. And then they go back in. Next set of people turn on the lights, come out, sing along, dance out a little bit, go back in. And the next morning, I said, "Did I dream this? Like that? That's not possible." So I asked some of the guys. I said, "I was a little over the top yesterday, but I'm remembering this. Did that really happen, or did my mind invent it?" He says, "Yeah, no, we were walking all along the street. And that's what happens."
All you hear is clave. Yeah, I mean,
No, no,
like
people
more.
joining in, and they
Yeah,
weren't
yeah,
saying,
yeah,
"Hey, I got to sleep." They're joining in, and
yeah, yeah.
it
It's like,
continued. Beautiful,
yeah, it's that I always remember that night that Howard did that,
nice.
and then I mentioned Caco, the timbala player for the Alegre All Stars. He was a local hero. Everybody knew who the Alegre All Stars were in the Latino community. And then Caco was very black. He had what we call a papazo, which was he had his hair processed, conked, like what I talked about before, and it was up like that and everything, like a lot of the great R&B soul singers of the day. He used to dress sharp, but I used to play basketball with his nephews. And I used to, one day they go, "Hey, you want to see my uncle's suits?" So they bring us up to his apartment, and they had the key, and we go in, and they open up the closet, and all these shark skin suits, man, in different colors, like 30, 20 different suits, man. It looked like a rainbow of colors, like pink, light blue, like a scene out of that movie with Robert De Niro. What's it called? Goodfellas, you know.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden, we hear the door opening, and it's Caco. And Caco, everybody knew him too because of the way he spoke. He spoke like this. Oye, ¿qué pasa? Oye, like that, almost like a black Cuban, but you can't hardly understand him, you know.
Right.
So he starts laughing. He goes, "You like the suits?" In Spanish. He goes, "Yeah." He goes, "Put one on." And we're little kids, man. We're 12, you know, "Put one on." And he goes, so we put them on, you know, to appease him, but he was acting over the top mad, but to scare us. So he takes a Polaroid camera and he takes a picture of us. Somewhere that picture exists, and then you put him back, you know, and everything, you know, and because he was a star band leader and a star timbalero, so he's living in my neighborhood. Um, in my building lived a guy named Candido Rodriguez, who was a timbala player, and he played jazz drums too, and he played timbales for Ricardo Ray and Bobby Cruz, who had the hottest salsa band at the time, Richie Ray and Bobby Cruz. Richie Ray, Ricardo Maldonado, was a Juilliard trained New Yorican pianist, tremendous chops. He could play Chopin, he could play anything, Bach, but he could play Peruchin on the piano, you know, on the piano. And Bobby Cruz was this incredible tenor voice as a salsa singer. So Candido was his timbalero. He lived in my building, and I think his wife's name was Wanda, I believe. She did my mother's hair. So he was another local hero, and we heard him. You know, and he had a big afro. He was what we call grifo. He was my color skin, but he had a big afro.
Right. Right.
That's what a grifo is. Okay, or habao, we also call it. And he had a local hit. After he left Richie Ray and Bobby Cruz, he formed his own band. He had a local hit. I remember it's called Soy Mezclado. I'm mixed. Soy mezclado, soy blanco y moreno. Y porque soy moreno, la jevita me encuentra muy bueno. Soy mezclado. I'm mixed. I'm black and I'm white. And because I'm black and I'm white, all the chicks dig me, you know. So that was he was a local hero. I was surrounded by all this happening at the same time. The rumba tradition in the streets, salsa coming out of the bodegas, jazz coming out of the TV and through my father as well. Who, I mean, man, I knew who Ahmad Jamal was, man, when I was 9 years old, because my father had
Oh,
those records by Ahmad Jamal, the Modern Jazz Quartet, all that stuff. So, and I'm watching TV. I'm the last generation that saw jazz on TV.
right. Right.
See Dave
Yeah,
Brubeck doing
I remember.
Take Five on TV. See Joe Morello soloing on TV. You see Ed Shaughnessy
Oh yeah.
roaring with the
Oh
Tonight
yeah.
Show band with Johnny Carson. The Dick Cavett show had Bobby Rosengarten, the drummer, leading that band. Little did I know that most of the musicians in that band, Jerry Dodgen, Victor Bass, all these guys I would play with later on. David Frost, his show, he had Dr. Billy Taylor as the musical director, the pianist.
Right, that's right.
Little did I know that I would get to play with him later on and become friends with him. So I would flip back and forth. In the afternoons, Mike Douglas had an afternoon talk show, and he had a jazz combo with all these great Philadelphia-based jazz musicians. And of course, at all these shows, who would be a guest? Dizzy Gillespie, Buddy Rich.
Right.
My sister used to look at the TV guide during the week and circle for me when Buddy Rich would be a guest on one of these shows. Or if he popped up out of nowhere, all of a sudden my sister yelling, Bobby, Buddy Rich.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
These were our heroes. And then, of course, through PBS TV, I don't know I guess you have public television in Canada.
CBC, yeah.
Right. And I know Canada is very forward-thinking and sponsoring and producing independent films. So through PBS, who did I get to see? I got to see Ginger Baker playing with Cream,
right?
Jimi Hendrix, all these incredible rock groups that were experimenting or with jazz influence. And who did I get to see? Don Ellis, the ultimate futurist. Now, those of you who are watching, if you want to see if somebody's really hip, ask them if they know who Don Ellis is. If they say yes, you know that person is very incredibly hip. Great trumpeter, the most forward-thinking musician in the history of jazz. He was experimenting with electronics before anybody else, with odd meters.
The odd meter thing was crazy, yeah.
Yeah, he was an ethnomusicologist. He fell in love with Brazilian music, Afro-Cuban music, Bulgarian music, East Indian music. Forget about it.
Yeah.
If you want to check him out, there's many YouTube videos of him, but check him out at the Montreux. What is it? Not the Montreux. Yeah, I believe it's the Montreux Jazz Festival, 1977.
Right. He also wrote some books. He also wrote some books on odd time signatures that he was working with way back.
He wrote the music for the French Connection. That music won the Academy Award, I think, for his theme for that. The 7-Ups. Check out the French Connection. It's pretty deep. If you want to see what the New York was that I grew up in, check out the French Connection. It was down and dirty and nasty, but the music was, like I said before, was what kept us alive. You'll see New York at its lowest point. But Don also experimented, because of his studies of East Indian music, with improvising with quarter tones.
Right.
So he had this trumpet company build a trumpet with 4 valves so he could do quarter tones on the trumpet. He was also very forthright in that he hired women in his band. Like he would use 2 drum set players. He occasionally would play drums besides playing trumpet. He was a great drummer. And he had a guy playing congas. And then he'd have a woman, I forgot her name. You'll see her in those videos. She was playing classical percussion. Well, I don't want to use the word classical, orchestral percussion. Vibes, marimba, xylophone, timpani.
Was it Ruth Underwood?
No, it was another person.
Okay.
It was another person. You'll see her in the videos from 1977. But that's what inspired Frank Zappa to use the 2 drummers when he did that time period when he used 2 drummers. So if you get the album Live at the Roxy, you'll hear Chester Thompson, Ralph Humphrey, and we're playing drum set, and Ruth is playing the orchestral percussion. So I'm listening to that and watching that. So how did I get to Berklee? Well, I'm playing salsa gigs in New York City, playing gigs.